This is really a catalytic moment for Canada and for our government, and I say that because we've got a Prime Minister who has brought the importance of the Arctic and sovereignty that is not recognized by countries like Russia and our friends, the United States.
I think it's about time Canada government need to focus on what are the beneficial for Canada. It's Arctic. It's that one particular area. This particular project is the one that could shovel ready in 2026.
Canada just made the boldest northern move in a generation. After decades of talking about Arctic sovereignty, decades of warning about foreign interest in the Northwest Passage, and decades of letting others develop while we stood still, Nunavut's Inuit leadership has stepped forward with something transformative. A fully permitted, community-backed deep-sea port at Qikiqtarjuaq that is ready to begin construction as early as spring 2026. At a moment when the United States is distracted by President Donald Trump's tariff battles, Russia is expanding its northern military infrastructure, and China is quietly investing across the circumpolar world, Canada is finally stepping into the arena, and it's doing so in the one place where presence is power, the Arctic. This port is not just an infrastructure project, it is Canada deciding, at long last, to take the North seriously. The recent press conference brought together Qikiqtarjuaq Corporation, the Qikiqtani Inuit Association, and business leaders like John Risley to deliver a single, unmistakable message to Ottawa. The port is ready to go, and Canada needs to move with it. For more than 15 years, this project has been studied, reviewed, and analyzed. It has passed environmental assessments. It has earned full community approval. The location sits next to one of the richest turbot fishing grounds in the country. Yet, because Nunavut has no deep-water port, ships harvesting from Nunavut waters are forced to unload in Greenland or in far-off southern jurisdictions. Every trip that ends outside the territory drains at least $1 million in direct value, revenue that leaves the region before it ever has a chance to support local jobs or local development. The port site already has a 3,800-foot airstrip that can be extended into a tactical base. Defense officials have expressed interest because traffic in the Davis Strait is rising, and Canada lacks permanent infrastructure in the area. And with Northwest Passage shipping activity expected to increase over the next decade, Qikiqtarjuaq sits at the gateway of a corridor that global powers are watching very closely. The project's cost has risen to approximately $350 million for Phase 1, with just over $53 million already secured. But what matters most is this: the port is shovel-ready, fully permitted and capable of beginning construction in the spring of 2026, provided Ottawa steps forward as a partner, whether through Coast Guard presence, defense tenancy, or national infrastructure funding. This moment is not a plea. It is a challenge to the federal government to finally match the ambition of the communities that live in the North. For years, Canada has watched other Arctic states build ports, runways, military bases, and research hubs, while we hesitated. Russia constructed an entire chain of northern ports. Norway equipped its far north region with modern deep-water facilities. China declared a polar Silk Road and made long-term investments in pre-Arctic logistics. Even the United States, despite its own slow pace, has at least moved forward on upgrading northern military infrastructure. Meanwhile, Canada mostly held press conferences. Nunavut's leaders captured the problem perfectly when they said Canada had nothing in the Arctic compared to its peers. This port is the moment the country stops being the silent Arctic nation, the one with the longest coastline but the least infrastructure, and starts being a real participant in northern geopolitics. Prime Minister Mark Carney has already signaled that the Arctic will become a central pillar of Canada's nation-building agenda. Reuters recently reported that his government plans to expand Arctic presence with new year-round operations and a long-term security commitment. Unlike previous administrations that focused on symbolic gestures, Carney views Arctic infrastructure as a structural investment, something permanent, something strategic, something that strengthens Canada for decades, not election cycles. The Qikiqtarjuaq port aligns perfectly with this new doctrine. It is Indigenous-led, it is economically sound, and it is geographically irreplaceable. What makes this project even more powerful is who is leading it. This is not a Southern corporation imposing a project from outside. It is driven by Inuit organizations, Qikiqtarjuaq Corporation and the Qikiqtarjuaq Inuit Association, who understand the land, the waters, and the long-term economic needs of the region. When northern communities take ownership, projects gain legitimacy. Environmental oversight is stronger, benefits stay in the region, and the work is grounded in stewardship rather than extraction. Canada's sovereignty is always strongest when Indigenous leadership is at the center. This port proves that point. Right now, Nunavut's fishing industry produces enormous value, but almost all of that value leaves immediately because the territory has nowhere to unload, process, or ship catch. By forcing vessels to offload outside Nunavut, Canada effectively exports jobs, GDP, and tax revenue before it ever touches Inuit communities. A functioning deep-sea port changes everything. Fisheries can unload at home. Processing can happen in the region. Tourism can flourish with proper docking capacity. Marine services and shipping logistics can finally exist. For the first time, Nunavut can keep the wealth that comes from its own waters. This is economic sovereignty as much as geographic sovereignty. The United States is not paying attention to the Arctic. Under Trump's second administration, Washington is consumed by tariff wars, legal challenges, and corporate pushback. Arctic infrastructure is nowhere near the top of America's priority list. That creates a rare strategic opening. Canada can build, quietly, decisively, while the U.S. is distracted. For once, Canadian sovereignty is not being overshadowed by American power. Instead, Canada is seizing the initiative. NATO has been demanding stronger Arctic infrastructure from Canada for years. A deep seaport capable of hosting Coast Guard vessels, naval ships, tactical aircraft, and search and rescue operations gives Canada exactly the credibility it has been missing. This project doesn't just strengthen northern communities, it strengthens Canada's standing in the alliance. The most powerful part of this project is not the concrete or the cranes or the dollars. It is the shift in mindset. For too long, Canada treated the North as something distant, expensive, and symbolic. Now the country is treating it as the center of future strategy, economic, military, environmental, and national. This port is the first chapter of a new Arctic era. The Qikiqtarjuaq deep-sea port is not a proposal. It is not a concept. It is a project ready to break ground in spring 2026. If Ottawa steps forward, Canada will enter the next decade not as a bystander in the Arctic, but as a builder, a leader, and a nation investing in its longest coastline. The countdown has started. Now the question is simple. Will Canada meet it?
We're going to bring it from 25% to 50%, the tariffs on steel into the United States of America. Nobody's going to get around that.
You're in the market to purchase a new car, buy one of those that are made by Canadian hands that possibly is made from the steel where I work in my home. So we're Canadian. We'll be proud of it. We don't want to be a 51st state. We're proud of that flag, that leaf.
Canada's steel industry just refused to fold, while the United States' own manufacturing supply chain is quietly paying the price. In this video, we'll show how Ottawa's bold budget moves and strategic pivot are turning a Trump-era tariff blitz into a Canadian comeback story. If you think tariffs are always a win for American industry, think again. In 2025, U.S. President Donald J. Trump doubled down on his America First trade policy by imposing 50% tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, hitting allies like Canada with the same force as strategic rivals. For Canada, Historically America's biggest steel supplier, the blow was severe. Algoma Steel, Stelco, and multiple mid-sized producers faced immediate pressure as the U.S. market, their largest export destination, suddenly became uneconomical. At the same moment, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, revealed his first budget, a sweeping industrial plan framed as a generational shift. This budget introduced a $10 billion loan facility to stabilize big manufacturers, a targeted tariff relief program for steel and aluminum, and, most importantly, a clear political declaration. Canada will reduce reliance on U.S. markets and build a self-sustaining industrial base. Meanwhile, the U.S. escalated further by expanding tariffs to more than 400 steel-related product categories, including wind turbines, EV components, and construction inputs. This triggered alarm bells across American industry, with warnings from auto giants, energy firms, and construction associations about rising costs and disrupted supply chains. The dynamic became clear. Trump tightened the screws, Canada adapted, and now the economic consequences are swinging back across the border. The central misconception in Trump's tariff strategy is the belief that the U.S. can raise trade walls without disrupting the tightly woven North American industrial ecosystem it helped build. Canada's steel fight offers a real-time case study in why that belief is flawed. Carney's government moved quickly to reposition steel as a national security asset rather than a simple export commodity. The new budget's Buy Canadian strategy ensures that steel from Sault Ste. Marie, Hamilton, or Regina doesn't sit idle waiting for U.S. political moods. It goes directly into Canada's own bridges, EV plants, naval upgrades, and transmission lines. Steel becomes part of a larger effort to give Canada sovereignty over the materials that power its economy. While Trump's political objective was to protect American steelworkers, the downstream reality is far more complicated. When U.S. automakers see input costs spike, when EV manufacturers delay production schedules, and when energy infrastructure builders report higher bids, the job losses ripple outward. Steel may gain stability in the U.S., but the broader industrial economy absorbs the blow. It's the classic tariff paradox: protect one sector, punish 10 others. Canada, meanwhile, is refusing to play the victim. Ottawa is actively building a domestic steel demand engine that can replace the lost U.S. market. Carney's budget doesn't hide its ambition. Create a Canadian industrial corridor capable of fully supplying the nation's energy transition, housing plan, defense upgrades, and northern infrastructure. That requires millions of tons of steel annually, and Canada plans to produce it internally. Here's the real turning point. Canada is no longer just reacting to tariffs. It is actively redesigning its economy so that U.S. pressure loses leverage. If America wants to weaponize access to its market, Canada will simply reduce its exposure to that weapon. And this shift is already visible. New domestic procurement rules, green steel investments, electric arc furnace conversions, and the rise of long-term Canada-first infrastructure planning. Meanwhile, the United States is encountering the uncomfortable reality of tariff-driven inflation. Higher steel prices feed directly into higher auto prices, higher construction costs, and higher consumer costs. U.S. manufacturers must choose between overpriced domestic steel or tariff-inflated imports. Both options hurt competitiveness. Tariffs may play well at rallies, but they disrupt the backbone industries that actually determine America's economic strength. This leads to a deeper regional paradox. North America was built on integrated supply chains. For decades, steel crossed the border seamlessly, enabling both countries to manufacture at world-class efficiency. Trump's tariffs fracture this integration, and Canada, not the U.S., is proving more capable of adjusting. And that's what makes this moment historic. Canada is laying the foundation for a more independent industrial identity, while U.S. manufacturers face the destabilizing consequences of their own government's tariff policy. Canada's pivot is not merely defensive, it is transformational. Canada is positioning its steel industry as the anchor of a new national industrial strategy, one that supports everything from the country's clean energy ambitions to its Arctic security posture. In the new budget's fine print, steel is directly linked to hydro dam expansion, offshore wind fabrication, LNG terminal upgrades, EV battery plants, modernized rail corridors, and the mass housing push Ottawa is preparing to launch. That means the steel sector is no longer just reacting to global markets, it is being built into the heart of Canada's long-term economic architecture. In practice, this means a Canadian construction boom powered by Canadian steel, not imported inputs. It means warships built in Halifax with domestic steel plate, transmission towers in Alberta made from domestic beam steel, and Ontario's EV supply chain anchored by Hamilton's green steel transition. Every dollar Canada redirects inward reduces U.S. leverage. Every new domestic contract strengthens the argument that Canada doesn't need to accept economic pressure as the cost of living next to a superpower. Meanwhile, the U.S. is entering a dangerous loop. Tariffs raise costs. Higher suppress investment costs. And suppressed investment makes America less competitive globally. Auto companies are already warning that price increases will reduce sales. Construction groups say infrastructure bids are rising. Renewable energy developers report higher steel-intensive project costs, threatening U.S. climate targets. This is the structural weakness Trump's policy never accounted for. America's strength comes from affordable inputs, not artificially inflated ones. Canada's defiance is exposing that flaw. By showing that a middle-power nation can withstand U.S. tariff aggression and even turn it into a growth strategy, Canada is proving something larger about the modern economy. Integration is a strength, but diversification is survival.
And Canada is choosing survival with surprising confidence.
Canada's steel industry is proving something essential. Resilience is engineered, not improvised. Through investment, policy clarity, and strategic redirection, Canada is turning a tariff assault into an industrial pivot. Meanwhile, the United States, the architect of the pressure campaign, is discovering that economic walls cut both ways. So the real question becomes, who is actually winning the steel war? The country adapting or the country reacting? Canada may have already given us the answer.
While President Trump makes progress on trade in Asia, he is currently icing out America's neighbor to the north, announcing an additional 10% tariff on Canada, apparently irked by a TV ad paid for by the Canadian province of Ontario, an ad that ran on U.S. TV network.
Furious Canada just hit back at Donald Trump in a way no one saw coming. The U.S. president exploded over an anti-tariff ad that went viral across America. He slapped a new 10% tariff on Canadian goods. It was meant as punishment, but Ontario Premier Doug Ford did not apologize. He called the ad the most successful campaign in North American history.
Do you have any regrets about stirring the pot, possibly making things harder on your fellow Canadians due to this retaliation from President Trump?
No, I don't believe so. The person that started this whole thing around the world, not just with Canada, is President Trump. And the American people are finally feeling the effects of tariffs.
While Trump lashed out, Ford stood firm. Instead of retreating, he used the moment to tell Americans that tariffs on Canada are really taxes on themselves. In a few sentences, Ford turned a trade dispute into a public reckoning, and this time the political punch came from the North.
Ford's message was simple but devastating. He reminded Americans that protectionism always backfires. He pointed to hard numbers, not political slogans. Over the past 5 months, U.S. manufacturing employment had fallen steadily, while inflation climbed above 4%, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Those are the exact indicators Trump once promised to fix. Ford's campaign wasn't about insults or theater. It was a calculated move to speak directly to American households who now feel the cost of Trump's tariffs every time they shop or fill up their tanks. And the method was brilliant. By borrowing words once spoken by Ronald Reagan in 1987, Ford used a conservative icon's own warning to expose the danger of Trump's policy. What began as a television spot became a statement of economic logic. When the United States taxes its closest trading partner, it is its own workers who pay first. Trump's response only magnified Ford's message. His outburst gave the Ontario campaign a reach no advertising budget could ever buy. The ad ran during the World Series, but the real audience came afterward when American media replayed the story across primetime. By morning, headlines across CNN, Reuters, and Politico called the video a direct challenge to Trump's trade agenda. The more the president tried to silence the message, the louder it echoed. Inside the White House, officials framed the new tariff as necessary protection. Outside, economists called it self-inflicted damage. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce warned that the latest duties could slow factory activity across the Midwest, especially in states like Michigan and Ohio that depend on cross-border supply chains. What Trump meant as a show of strength became proof of his vulnerability. Canada and the United States are not just neighbors. Their economies are literally built into one another. Every day, roughly $2 billion in goods cross the border, according to Statistics Canada. Car parts move from Windsor to Detroit, then back again for final assembly. Ontario steel feeds factories in Illinois, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. When tariffs disrupt that cycle, American plants face higher input costs. A study by the Peterson Institute for International Economics found that each 10% tariff on metal imports adds nearly $300 to the average cost of an American-made vehicle. Multiply that across the entire auto sector, and the result is thousands of layoffs, not job gains. Ford's warning now looks prophetic. By trying to punish Canada, Trump is punishing the very workers he promised to defend. In a globalized supply chain, there is no such thing as a one-sided victory. Every tariff creates collateral damage, and this time, most of that damage is landing inside U.S. borders. Imagine what would happen if Canada decided to step back. Without Canadian nickel, aluminum, potash, and uranium, American factories and farms would feel the shock almost overnight. Data from Natural Resources Canada show that the United States buys more than 60% of Canada's nickel and 75% of its potash output. These are materials essential to manufacturing, energy, and agriculture. If that flow slows or stops, prices in the U.S. surge and production timelines stretch. Detroit's assembly lines would stall within weeks. American farmers would face fertilizer shortages just as harvest season peaks. Importing replacements from Asia would take months and cost far more. Canada doesn't need to threaten retaliation. The structure of the North American economy is already its shield. Ford's calm but defiant stance reminded everyone that Canada's strength lies in its reliability, and removing that reliability is the one thing the U.S. can't afford. After the controversy exploded, Prime Minister Mark Carney chose a measured tone. He paused the Ontario campaign to reopen trade talks, signaling that Canada still values stability over spectacle. But Ford held his line. He said no one could demand that Ontario stay silent while local jobs were at risk. The two approaches may look different, but they work in tandem. Carney plays the diplomat, keeping doors open in Washington. Ford plays the fighter, showing that Canada won't be bullied. Together, they form a strategy that combines restraint with resolve. While the United States is divided between outrage and defense, Canada is showing something rare: coordination under pressure. In this standoff, it is the quieter country acting with the louder purpose. Ford's viral campaign sent more than a message to Trump. It sent a warning to every policymaker in Washington. Canada is not a sidekick in North American trade. It is an essential partner that powers the U.S. economy, from energy to autos to agriculture. If Washington continues to weaponize tariffs against allies, it risks driving those allies toward new partnerships. Already, Ottawa's deepening trade with Japan, South Korea, and ASEAN nations, exploring alternative routes that reduce its dependence on the U.S. market. Trump's second term was meant to restore American dominance, but every new tariff pushes the U.S. further into isolation. America First is quietly becoming America Alone.
The question now is not whether Canada can adapt, it already is, but whether the U.S. can survive without the stability that partnership brings. In just a few days, a 60-second ad from Ontario transformed a policy debate into a moment of truth for the entire continent. It showed that words, when backed by data and conviction, can shake even the most powerful office in the world. Canada's response was not loud or angry. It was measured, factual, and unmistakably firm. Trump may hold the pen that signs tariffs, but Ford now holds the story that defines them. The irony is clear. A campaign meant to defend America's economy has ended up exposing its dependence on the very neighbor it tried to punish. Ford didn't need to shout or threaten. He just told the truth, and that truth hit harder than any tariff could. In this trade war, Canada didn't throw the first punch, but when it did, it landed perfectly.
We are confident that the domestic pressure from senators, governors, business leaders, union leaders in the United States will also create potentially an opportunity for us to come to an agreement with the American administration.
Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc has just delivered a message that cuts through the noise of tariffs, counter-tariffs, and political maneuvering. He declared that he is confident trade deals with the United States can still be reached. At first glance, it may sound optimistic, even overly so, given the hostile environment. But in truth, the statement is more than optimism. It is a sign that Canada sees leverage in a situation many assumed was stacked against it. This declaration comes at a time when Washington has unleashed some of the most aggressive trade measures in recent history. Under President Donald Trump's second term, tariffs have been applied broadly, with rates ranging from 10 to 50% on major partners. Canada has been hit particularly hard. Lumber, steel, aluminum, cabinets, and furniture are all facing steep duties as goods cross the border. These measures were supposed to pull jobs back to Detroit, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and showcase Trump as the dealmaker who could force allies to bend. Instead, they have set in motion forces that now threaten to undermine that very strategy.
Canada would not do what Japan, the EU, and others have done and settle for an across-the-board tariff from the U.S. in exchange for dropping sectoral tariffs leveled on softwood, steel, and aluminum.
When LeBlanc insisted Canada still has leverage, it was not bluster. His reasoning rests on the political and economic pain these tariffs are causing inside the United States. Governors, senators, business leaders, and union representatives are pressing the White House because they see the costs firsthand. Higher raw material prices are squeezing construction companies. Furniture makers in the Midwest are losing access to affordable inputs. Steel and aluminum duties are pushing up prices for auto parts and machinery. These ripple effects have made the tariffs a live issue in state capitals and in Congress. Ottawa has taken calculated steps in this environment. It rolled back many of its retaliatory tariffs to demonstrate a willingness to find common ground. Yet at the same time, Canada refused to strike a deal that mirrors what Japan or the European Union accepted. Those partners agreed to across-the-board tariff ceilings in exchange for relief on targeted products. Canada has drawn a different line. It insists that sector-specific duties on lumber, steel, and aluminum must be addressed directly.
And LeBlanc rejected the idea that protecting supply management, that's the system that shields dairy and poultry farmers in Canada from U.S. and foreign competition.
On top of this, Canada has stood firm in defending its supply management system. This policy, which shields dairy and poultry farmers from foreign competition, is described by the government as a cornerstone of food security and economic stability. LeBlanc's position is that it is non-negotiable. That message resonates domestically because it connects trade strategy to everyday life. Milk, cheese, and eggs are not abstract commodities. They are the products on kitchen tables across the country. Critics inside Canada have accused the government of weakness. Opposition leaders argue that promises of quick relief from tariffs have not been delivered. But when examined closely, Ottawa's stance is not weakness. It is a strategy of patience, relying on American domestic politics to do part of the work. The central irony of this trade conflict is that measures meant to squeeze Canada are now bouncing back on the United States. Consider the construction sector. Lumber tariffs of 10% layered on top of existing softwood duties are making homes more expensive to build. That matters in states where housing shortages are already severe. The furniture and cabinet tariffs, set to reach 25%, are another example. These costs are passed on to American consumers who already face higher living expenses. Retailers and importers are voicing frustration, and union leaders warn that prolonged tariffs could actually cost American jobs rather than save them. The auto industry illustrates the same pattern. Duties on Canadian steel and aluminum raise the price of components that U.S. factories rely on. Michigan and Ohio, states central to Trump's political coalition, are especially vulnerable. Companies are lobbying intensely, reminding policymakers that jobs depend on competitive supply chains, not just on national slogans. This is the first layer of backfire. Tariffs designed to force Canada to concede are fueling dissatisfaction at home. Senators and governors hear the complaints from businesses and workers in their districts. The White House may frame tariffs as a patriotic shield, but the daily reality of higher costs and delayed projects tells a different story. For Trump, the political stakes are high. He has built much of his image on being a master negotiator. Yet, if his strategy results in visible pain for American industries, his ability to claim victory weakens. The harder he pushes Canada, the more resistance builds inside his own borders. Beyond the short-term clash over tariffs lies a deeper shift. LeBlanc has said clearly that Canada's trade relationship with the United States will never return to what it once was. The days of assuming stability, of believing the rules of the Mulroney-Reagan or Clinton-Chrétien era still applied, are gone. This is not just rhetoric. It reflects a deliberate strategy to prepare Canada for a different future. LeBlanc describes this moment as a hinge, a turning point. Canada is using the pressure to accelerate diversification. By working with provinces, industries, and labor groups, the government is steering companies toward new partners. Europe has already signed on to a framework with the United States that caps tariffs, but Canada is looking to Europe for markets, not for concessions. Ottawa is also expanding ties with Indonesia, the United Kingdom, and Mexico. These relationships do not replace the American market overnight, but they gradually lessen dependence. The result is what LeBlanc calls a virtuous circle. The more Canadian businesses find success abroad, the less they are trapped by U.S. tariffs. With less dependency, Canada can negotiate with Washington on more balanced terms. And as that balance improves, it reinforces the incentive to diversify further. This is the second major backfire. Instead of tightening control over Canada, Trump's strategy has pushed his northern neighbor into building resilience. What was once a one-sided dependency is evolving into a network of options. The United States will remain Canada's largest trading partner, but no longer its only indispensable one.
Dominic LeBlanc's confidence is not a promise of easy victories. It is an acknowledgement that Canada can endure and even adapt under pressure. The tariffs meant to isolate and weaken have instead opened paths for resilience. Trump's policies are producing two clear reversals. First, they are creating internal backlash in the United States, where businesses, unions, and local leaders are shouldering the costs. Second, they are pushing Canada to diversify, turning what was once a weakness into a strategic strength. The relationship between Canada and the United States has indeed changed forever. Tariffs are no longer just a negotiating tactic. They have become a catalyst for restructuring how two economies interact. Trump wanted to make America less dependent on foreign partners, but in the process, he has made Canada less dependent on America. That is why LeBlanc can speak with confidence. The path forward is not about restoring an old status quo. It is about shaping a new reality, where Canada negotiates from a firmer footing and where the United States must reckon with the unintended consequences of its own policies. The backfire is clear, and the lessons will echo in every round of trade talks to come.